The horses were waiting for them, saddled, calm, their coats glinting in the Texas sun. The air was still except for the creak of leather and the low shuffle of hooves. A cowboy stood beside them, hat tilted back, a faint smile on his dusted face. "You'll be learning to ride," he said, his voice slow, even, almost kind. For a moment, the women thought they'd misheard. Prisoners weren't supposed to ride horses. They were supposed to dig, or scrub, or march. But the man only nodded toward the corral as if this was perfectly ordinary. Behind him, other ranch hands were tightening saddles, holding reins, waiting for their unlikely students. One of the Italians whispered, "Is this a trick?" Another laughed, a nervous, trembling sound that vanished in the dry wind. Elena Ricci, 27 years old, stood at the edge of the corral, staring at the animal assigned to her, a pale brown mare with a white blaze down her nose. The mare flicked her ears, bored, unbothered by the sight of prisoners in faded khaki. Elena had expected a prison camp, fences, shouting, rifles. She had expected humiliation. But this was impossible. The cowboy turned to her, pointing toward the saddle. "You'll get the hang of it," he said. He might as well have been speaking another language. But his tone, calm, patient, said enough. Elena shook her head. She had been a signal clerk in North Africa before capture, not a farm girl. The closest she'd ever been to a horse was in a parade. Now, somehow, she was expected to climb on one. When she hesitated, the cowboy smiled again and offered his hand, palm up. "Try," he said simply. Around them, the others were already mounting awkwardly, with help from the ranchers. There were no guards, no chains, no guns, only the sound of boots scraping against stirrups, and the strange laughter of women who no longer knew whether to be afraid or amazed. For the next few minutes, chaos reigned. A few horses sidestepped, one bolted and circled the pen before a cowboy caught it. Dust rose in thick waves, coating faces and uniforms, but no one shouted, no one struck. The cowboys just steadied the women, repeated their instructions, and tried again. By the time the sun reached its peak, the scene had changed. The horses were calmer, so were the women. Some were even smiling, and when Elena finally found her balance, back straight, reins steady, she looked out at the wide, endless horizon and felt something break loose inside her. For the first time since her capture, she wasn't waiting to be ordered. She was moving, choosing, breathing. She didn't understand it. None of them did. But she would remember this moment, the dust, the laughter, the smell of sun-warmed leather, for the rest of her life. That was Texas in the summer of 1944. Days earlier, those same women had been prisoners of war, crossing the Atlantic in the belly of transport ships, crammed, shoulder to shoulder, certain they were being sent somewhere to disappear. The rumors had followed them from Italy to Africa to the American coast. Stories of cruelty, starvation, punishment. They had been told that American captivity meant shame, that women would fare worst of all. When the trucks finally rolled to a stop outside Fort Worth, the women braced themselves for barbed wire and barking dogs. Instead, they found blue sky, open land, and men in denim who handed them water instead of orders. They hadn't come to a prison. They had come to a ranch, and waiting for them there, impossibly, absurdly, were the horses. That evening, as the sun melted behind the low hills and the smell of hay drifted through the dry air, Elena stood near the corral, brushing dust from her borrowed boots. The white mare she'd ridden earlier dozed in the fading light, her breath slow and heavy. Behind her, the bunkhouse door creaked. Someone laughed inside. Someone else hummed an American tune she didn't recognize. Elena glanced back at the pasture one more time, then at the horizon. Her voice was low. She wasn't even sure she meant to speak. This is America? She doesn't expect an answer. The words fall like dust into the wind, swallowed by the sighs of the sky. But the question stays with her, vibrating beneath every breath, every blink, every heartbeat. Because everything in front of her, the cowboy's easy smile, the smell of horses, the clear water still on her lips, does not match what she was told. Not even close. Back in Italy, before the surrender, before the capture, before the ships, there had been certainty. Officers barked it, nurses whispered it, posters plastered it. If you are taken alive, you will suffer. One sergeant in Naples had said it plainly. If they capture you, they'll make you dig your own grave. You'll beg them for a bullet. In Sicily, before she boarded the transport, Elena remembered seeing crude sketches passed hand to hand, dirty cartoons of women on leashes, women in cages, women chained to trucks. No one said where the drawings came from. Everyone believed them anyway. They were told the Americans had no honor, that they used prisoners as tools, that women, especially, would be used in worse ways. They smile, one pamphlet warned, but it is not kindness, it is conquest. And so, when Elena sees a man in denim hand her friend a fresh-baked biscuit, she flinches as though watching a trap being set. Her body still believes the stories, even if her eyes begin to doubt them. The journey from Italy to Texas had been its own kind of war. After the surrender, they were taken in batches, sometimes in the middle of the night, sometimes straight from hospitals or depots, marched onto British trucks, then ships. No one explained where they were going. Some thought it was Africa. Others whispered Malta. A few believed they'd be shot at sea. But the ships kept sailing west. Weeks passed in the belly of Liberty vessels, dark, loud places that smelled of oil and metal. The women shared bunks with lice, rats, and rumors. Every port brought more questions, never answers. In Gibraltar, they caught a glimpse of the sun again. In Halifax, they were transferred to trains, and for days after, they rattled across a continent that seemed too big to be real. The windows showed forests, then plains, then dry flatness that went on forever. It was a kind of nothingness so large it felt holy. By the time they arrived in Texas, most of the women had stopped asking where they were. They just wanted it to be over. And now it was over. But not in the way they'd expected. They are not forced into mines. They are not spat on. No one shouts. No one hits. Instead, horses, a warm breakfast, a dog chasing flies in the dust, a man asking, politely, if she needs more water. And that's what makes it so much worse. Because the mind needs things to make sense. Fear is simple. Kindness is not. The women whisper among themselves at night. What do they want? Why are they feeding us? What happens if we let our guard down? Elena lies awake in the dark, the smell of straw and soap mixing in the warm air. She listens to the others breathe. Some snore softly. Others shift, restless. She thinks of the officer who told her she'd die in chains. She remembers believing him. She still wants to. Because if this isn't a trick, if this is real, then everything she believed about her enemy is wrong. and that is more terrifying than any cell or bullet. The cowboy who taught her to hold the reins smiled again today, not mockingly, not with menace, just a smile, as if he truly didn't see her as an enemy. It shook her more than shouting ever could. She isn't ready for this place, not because it's cruel, because it isn't. And somewhere deep inside, she feels the first crack, tiny, silent, in the wall she built to survive. The next morning, the women wake to the smell of bacon, frying in cast-iron pans, coffee brews strong and black on the stove. Biscuits appear, flaky and warm, and there's butter, real butter, not the pale gray margarine from army tins. The table is long and wooden, set outdoors beneath the shade of a cottonwood tree. No one knows whether to sit. The cowboys are already eating. They gesture for the women to join. Some hesitate. Others sit stiffly, unsure if it's a trick. No one stops them. No one yells. They eat in silence at first, then in disbelief. After breakfast, the interpreter arrives with a clipboard and a calm voice. "You'll be learning to ride," he says. "The ranch needs help moving cattle." It takes a moment for the words to register. Ride? Surely they've misunderstood. But there, waiting by the corral, are the horses, saddled, shifting in the sun. One by one, the women are brought forward. Some try to decline, others pretend not to understand. But the cowboys are patient. They show how to mount, where to place each hand, how to hold the reins. The first attempts are awkward. A few fall, a few curse. One woman bursts into tears when her horse bolts 2 steps sideways. But no one is punished. No one is mocked. The cowboys help them up, dust them off, and try again. By noon, a handful of the women are riding laps. Not well, but upright. Elena's mare is slow and stubborn. Still, by the end of the day, she learns to guide her in a circle. The dust clings to her sweat. Her muscles ache, and yet she feels lighter than she has in months. Something about the motion, the wind, the rhythm between her and the animal offers a sensation she no longer has a word for. Freedom. Not the kind with maps and borders, a different kind. Of freedom, of the body, of being trusted with something powerful, and not being punished when she falters. The bunkhouse that night is quieter than usual. No one talks about escape. No one whispers about the war. Instead, someone asks, "Do you think they'll let us ride again tomorrow?" If you're watching this from somewhere far away, whether you're in Texas, like they were, or across an ocean, let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from. These stories connect us across time and place. And if you'd like to see more of them, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps us keep making them. By the end of the week, the women begin to rise before the cowboys. They check the water troughs, gather the brushes. They are not ordered. They just do it. Riding lessons continue, but with fewer falls and more laughter. One of the women starts braiding flowers into her horse's mane. Another teaches a cowboy how to say grazie properly. They are still prisoners, but the barbed wire is gone. In its place, there are fences meant for animals, barns that creak in the wind, and people who ask, not command. By now, the fear has dulled into something else. Caution, perhaps, but not distrust, not anymore. Not after today. It starts with the letters. One morning, a sergeant from the Army's administrative office arrives with a bundle of pale blue stationery and a clipboard. Each woman is given a single page. They are told they may write home. 1 page, 1 chance. No political discussion, no locations, Nothing that could aid the enemy. But they may say they are alive. They may speak of food, health, work. Elena stares at the paper for a long time before touching her pencil to it. What can she say that won't be crossed out? What can she say that will even be believed? In the end, she keeps it simple. Dearest Mama, we are being treated well. I am eating. I am safe. The people here are strange, but kind. They let us ride horses. She reads it twice, unsure whether she sounds grateful or delusional. Then she signs her name, folds the letter, and hands it back. Others write similar things. Maria describes the bunkhouse and how the sun sets gold over the stables. Lucia writes about biscuits and black coffee. Anna includes a drawing of her horse, a small mare named Daisy. They send the letters without knowing if they will arrive. Weeks pass. Then, one by one, the replies begin to trickle in. Elena's letter is the first to come back. She unfolds the paper carefully. It's her mother's handwriting, but the words are tight and confused. Elena, are you sure? Is this real? Perhaps you are being tricked. Perhaps you have been drugged. We have heard stories. Another woman reads hers aloud. It is only 5 words. Have you gone mad, girl? A silence follows. No one laughs. They all knew, in some part of themselves, that their families would not understand. But seeing the disbelief written in ink stings more than they expected. Back home, people are still sleeping in basements, lining up for bread, jumping at the sound of aircraft overhead. Here, in Texas, the women wake to birdsong. They brush horses and bake bread. They are learning the names of trees. It doesn't feel fair, and maybe it isn't, but it's real. They begin to watch the Americans more closely, not just the Cowboys, but the way they live. They argue, loudly and without fear. They tease one another. They eat until full, then offer the leftovers. They do not bow to anyone. Even the officers are casual. Hats come off at the table. Conversations are direct. There is a kind of ease to it all. A confidence that doesn't rely on violence or posture. One afternoon, Elena sees 2 cowboys working on a broken wagon wheel. One curses when the wrench slips. The other throws him a rag and says, "You always over-tighten it, you mule." They laugh. The wagon gets fixed. In Italy, such a slip would have meant a shouting match or worse. Here, mistakes are shrugged off. Another evening, the women are invited to sit near the fire while the ranch hands play music, harmonicas, a banjo, someone tapping out rhythm on an old tin bucket. One of the Americans starts singing in a low voice, slow and warm. The tune is unfamiliar, but something in it feels honest. No one tells them to stay. No one tells them to go. They just listen. And for the first time it occurs to them that maybe kindness is not a tactic. Maybe it is simply how these people choose to live. The stories they were told of American cruelty, of moral decay, of enemies without souls, begin to fade. Not because of what the Cowboys say, but because of what they don't. No threats, no boasts, just small human things. A second helping, a well-worn joke, a song shared under a sky, too wide to belong to any one country. The war hasn't ended, but something else has. The image of the enemy. It doesn't disappear all at once, but it changes, slowly, steadily, with each day that begins, not with orders, but with chores. The rhythm of the ranch is not declared, it is lived. The women wake before sunrise, their hands already moving before they speak. Some head to the stables to feed the horses, others to the henhouse with baskets swinging at their hips. A few take charge of laundry, hauling tubs of water, stirring soap with wooden paddles. The work is real, and it is exhausting, but it is honest, and it is theirs. No one counts heads in the morning. No one shouts if a task is late. The only rule, spoken plainly by the cowboys early on, is simple. Do your part. And so they do. Elena finds herself in the vegetable patch more often than not, her hands in the dirt, nails dark by midday. She pulls weeds, learns to spot bad roots, waters the rows with a rhythm that becomes second nature. Lucia becomes skilled with the horses, not just riding, but brushing them down, cleaning their hooves, checking their eyes. Maria takes to the kitchen, where she bakes cornbread with a level of precision that startles even herself. It's hard to explain the change. It's not dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It happens when someone remembers your name. When a cowboy tosses you an apple across the yard and says, "Nice work today, Rosa." It happens when someone holds the gate open or walks beside you in silence, carrying half the load. There are no ranks here, not really. The cowboys call the women ma'am, even when teasing them. The women begin to tease back. They learn the small differences in language. Not rope, but lasso. Not barn, but loafing shed. They pick up English not from lessons, but from repetition, from necessity, from laughter. Elena starts keeping a list of words in her pocket. She adds to it each night, next to her cot, whispering the sounds under her breath. One afternoon, after repairing a broken water line, she finds herself standing with two of the ranch hands in the shade of the windmill. No one speaks for a while. They just drink water and watch the cattle move slowly across the pasture. One of the men finally says, "You're getting good at this." She doesn't know if he means the work or the quiet. Maybe both. They don't talk about the war, not often, not directly. But sometimes it slips through. A photograph, pulled from a wallet. A scar, shown without comment. A word mispronounced that draws a shared smile. In those moments, something unspoken passes between them. Recognition, not of shared politics or alliances or language, but of survival. They are not the same, but they are also not strangers anymore. At night, in the bunkhouse, the women talk less of Italy and more of what they learned that day. Which horse kicked, who made the best coffee, which cowboy has the worst singing voice. They are still prisoners, technically, but the term no longer fits. There are no fences around the bunkhouse, no locked doors, just the sky above and the dust underfoot. They could run, perhaps, but none of them do, because this life, dusty, difficult, strange, feels more stable than anything they've known in months. More than that, it feels real. And for the first time in a long while, being needed feels better than being free. The sky darkens before anyone sees it coming. Clouds roll low and fast from the west, heavier than usual, bruised purple and gray. The wind shifts. Horses grow restless. Birds vanish. By mid-afternoon, the first distant thunder sounds like a cannon. The cowboys glance upward, faces tightening. One of them mutters, "We're going to get hit hard." Then the lightning comes, and with it, the cattle begin to run. The open pasture erupts. 100 head of longhorns panic at once, eyes wide, hooves pounding, crashing through the tall grass toward the southern fence line. There's no time for orders, no time for decisions, only instinct. The cowboys grab their hats, leap onto saddles, shout across the wind, and before anyone stops to ask permission, the women are moving too. They run through the mud, grabbing reins, mounting up bareback when the saddles take too long. Rain slashes sideways, stinging their eyes, blurring the horizon. No one thinks about uniforms or language or who belongs where. They ride together. Elena's mare fights her at first, but she leans forward, grips with her knees, and urges the animal forward. Somewhere to her left, Maria is waving her arms, driving a pocket of cattle back toward the fence. On the far side of the field, Lucia is shouting something in Italian and laughing, wild and soaked. A flash of lightning splits the sky. For a second, everything is illuminated in stark white. The herd, the riders, the chaos, and then it's dark again. But the line holds. They turn the cattle. They bring them in. By sundown, the storm begins to move on. The women and cowboys stand in the muck, soaked to the skin, hair plastered to their faces. No one speaks at first. The only sound is the heavy breath of animals and the drip of rain off the barn roof. Then someone lets out a low whistle. "Well," a cowboy says, "I reckon we'd have lost the lot if not for them." The others nod, slowly. No one claps. No one gives a speech. But the look in their eyes has changed. That night, they all gather by the fire. There is no separation anymore. No half circle for prisoners and another for ranch hands. They sit in one ring, steam rising from damp clothes, boots off, faces flushed from adrenaline and exhaustion. The fire crackles. Someone passes around tin cups of coffee. Someone else brings out a bottle of whiskey. It's not celebration. Not exactly. It's something closer to communion. The storm didn't just shake the fences. It shook something deeper. The cowboys don't talk about it, but their body language does. They hand over the last of the stew without hesitation. They offer blankets without being asked. One of them starts playing the harmonica, not to entertain, but just to fill the space. Elena listens with her hands wrapped around the warm tin cup. She isn't thinking about home, or capture, or even the war. She's thinking about the way Maria shouted at the cattle like they were schoolboys, the way Lucia rode full speed without flinching. She's thinking about how none of them asked whether they were allowed to help. They just did, and no one stopped them. That night, as the fire burns low, a cowboy leans back on his elbows and says, almost to himself, "Y'all aren't just visitors anymore." No one answers, but no one disagrees. Something has shifted, not in paperwork, not in policy, in the quiet space where people begin to truly see one another. A few mornings after the storm, the women returned from the stables to find something new above the bunkhouse door. It's a piece of wood, unevenly cut, nailed in place, and painted with broad, clumsy letters. Someone, clearly one of the ranch hands, had written it in thick red paint. The Italian Cowgirls. At first, they laugh. Not because it's funny, but because it's absurd. Cowgirls. They think of American movies with women in fringe jackets and perfect hair, twirling pistols, and riding into sunsets. That isn't them. Not really. And yet, they keep looking at the sign. By lunchtime, no one's laughing anymore. Not because it hurts, but because somehow it fits. The name stays. Not as a joke, not as an insult, but as a kind of badge. It appears in casual conversation, scribbled into the corner of a notebook, mentioned around the fire with a smirk and a nod. Elena hears one of the cowboys call out, "Where are my cowgirls at?" as the women carry buckets from the well. No one flinches. Lucia tips her hat in response. That week, Something shifts in the air. It's subtle, but unmistakable. Maria starts making cornbread from scratch, using a recipe she learned from the cook, but she adds garlic and rosemary, muttering, "Texan bread needs Italian soul." At dinner, the food becomes a mix of both worlds: stewed beans and polenta, hot peppers and pasta, strong coffee laced with chicory. The music changes, too. The harmonica is still there, but now it plays along with humming voices. The women sing softly in Italian, and the cowboys try to follow. One night, they all manage to stumble through a verse of Santa Lucia together. It isn't in tune, but it is in rhythm. Even the language begins to twist. The women say, "Y'all," without thinking. The cowboys curse in Italian, badly. A few sentences are born in the middle, half English, half memory, entirely new. They borrow boots that used to feel foreign and now feel broken in. They wear denim that was once stiff but now fits like a second skin. The line between host and guest, prisoner and warden, starts to blur under the weight of shared days and ordinary kindness. Some of the women begin to ask questions about ranch life. How long does it take to break a horse? Why does the windmill spin slower in the morning? What's the best way to patch a broken fence post? They're not just learning to survive here. They're learning to belong. Elena, who once refused to speak unless spoken to, now corrects a cowboy's Italian. He pretends to be offended. She pretends to believe him. At night, the women still write in their journals, still fold letters home. But those pages are different now. They contain stories of baking mishaps and saddle sores, of jokes told around campfires and words mispronounced with joy. They are not pretending they aren't prisoners, but they're no longer living as if that is all they are. The name on the sign, the Italian Cowgirls, began as a gesture, a bit of teasing. But in the dry Texas heat, surrounded by land too wide to fence in, it grows into something more. Not a title, an identity, one not given by an army or taken by war, one earned, day by day. And every time they walk beneath that sign, boots scuffing the porch, hands calloused from rope and work, they feel it. They are not who they were, but they are something now, something they chose. The news arrives like a splinter, small, sudden, and almost unnoticed. One of the cowboys fiddles with the radio in the kitchen, same as always. It crackles with static, coughs out half a country song, then settles into the voice of a broadcaster from somewhere far away. The women aren't listening, not at first. They're wiping down the table, rinsing tin cups, sweeping dust from the floorboards. Then the voice says it. Italy has surrendered. The war is all but over in the South. No one speaks. Not immediately. The broom in Elena's hands stops mid-stroke. The cup in Lucia's fingers trembles just enough to spill. One of the men looks up from his newspaper, then lowers it slowly. Outside, the wind moves through the mesquite trees like it always does. Horses shift in the distance. The earth does not react. But inside the room, something tightens. It isn't joy. It's something heavier. By the fire that night, the women sit close but say little. Some stare into the flames. A few wipe their faces when they think no one is watching. No one plays music. No one hums. Maria finally asks the question aloud. Do we have to go back? The others look at her, but no one answers, not because they don't understand, but because they do. Back means rubble. Back means silence and hunger and the memory of sirens. Back means returning to what was without knowing if any of it still exists. The word home had once meant safety, family, familiar roads. Now, it feels like a rumor. The cowboys don't say much either. A few offer coffee. A few sit nearby, quietly, as if standing guard against grief they cannot explain. Frank, the foreman, leans against a post and says only, "Won't be long now. It is not cruel. It is not unkind. But it is final." The next morning, the women wake before dawn, but the air feels different. Tasks are done, but slower. Chores linger. Conversation fades. There is nothing official yet, no trucks, no orders, but everyone feels it, like the first cool breath before a storm. Elena watches Lucia braid her hair with more care than usual. Maria polishes her boots, even though they'll be walking on the same dust. They are preparing, not to leave, not yet, but to lose something. The days that follow are filled with more silences than work. And in those silences, the women begin to notice small things more clearly. The way the sun catches on the edge of a horseshoe, the smell of coffee before it boils, the sound of boots on porch steps, each one a detail they fear forgetting. Elena begins to write in her notebook again. Not letters, just lines. Things she doesn't want to lose. The smell of rain on dirt, the creak of leather, the way they never locked the doors. In the evenings, when the fire is lit, no one says what they're all thinking. That leaving will not feel like release. It will feel like leaving a version of themselves behind. Because something had happened here. Not just survival. Change. They had been taught to wait for orders. Now they looked people in the eye. They had once feared this place would break them. Instead, it rebuilt them in quiet, ordinary ways. And now, with the end in sight, they find themselves grieving something they never expected to love. A bunkhouse, a horse, a stranger's respect. Whatever came next, it would not be the same. The trucks arrived just after sunrise, engines low and reluctant, as if they too understood the weight of what was coming. There was no announcement, no bugle or shouted order, just the slow rumble of tires over dry earth and the stillness that followed. The women had known this was coming. The letters had hinted at it. The radio had confirmed it. But knowing and feeling were different things entirely. This time, no one was forced to move. There were no rifles, no chains, and yet it was harder to climb into the back of those trucks than it had been to step off them months ago. The women stood in the yard with their canvas bags packed, slowly, reluctantly, with more care than anyone expected. The items were simple. A shirt mended 3 times, a comb borrowed and never returned, a journal tucked inside a boot. But some things would not fit in a bag. The cowboys came to say goodbye. Not all at once, not in ceremony, but in small gestures that said more than words. One handed Maria a red bandana he'd worn since spring. Another gave Lucia a photograph, creased and sun-faded, of them both laughing beside a fence they'd repaired together. Elena received a lasso, coiled tightly, its leather soft from use, and the words, "Figured you might teach someone else how to throw now." She nodded, unable to speak. Frank approached last. He stood in front of the bunkhouse, his hat in his hands, not quite looking anyone in the eye. "Y'all worked hard," he said. "Earned your keep. That's all any of us can ask." He turned to leave, then paused and reached behind him. From under his arm, he pulled out a white Stetson, soft, clean, still with the tag inside. "For the road," he said, handing it to Elena. "Don't forget the sky." She put it on. It was too big. It slipped down almost to her eyes. She laughed, then cried, then laughed again. Someone clapped. Someone else whistled. The sound didn't last long. The women climbed onto the truck beds with slow steps. No one rushed. The cowboys helped them lift their bags. When the doors closed, there were no shouts of farewell, only nods, hats raised, and silence. They did not wave. They held their breath. The wheels turned, and the ranch began to recede. The fences, the barn, the trees that had once seemed foreign and now felt like markers on a map of the heart. The land rolled out in waves behind them, golden, endless, familiar in a way no prisoner's camp should ever be. Inside the truck, no one spoke for a long time. Some held on to their gifts. Others looked out through the slats, eyes fixed on the disappearing horizon. Elena kept her hand on the brim of the hat, not to hold it in place, but to hold on to something else. They had come to Texas expecting pain, humiliation, and silence. They were leaving with calloused hands, full stomachs, and names they would remember for the rest of their lives. No one could quite explain what had happened, but they all felt it. They were not just returning to a country. They were leaving a kind of freedom, one not built by governments, but by people. And in that quiet departure, something inside them stayed behind. When the ship docked at Naples, the sky was the same dull gray it had been before the war, but everything beneath it had changed. The harbor was a ruin. Cranes twisted like broken bones. Buildings stood without roofs. Streets were reduced to stone and silence. Elena stepped onto the dock, with her bag slung over one shoulder and the white Stetson still perched on her head. A few American soldiers glanced at her and smiled. No one said anything. There was nothing to say. Repatriation, they called it. But nothing about it felt like return. The town she had grown up in was gone, not erased, but emptied. The bakery her uncle once owned was a burned-out shell. Her family's apartment had no windows, no power, no laughter. Her sister didn't recognize her at first. "You look different," she said, her eyes lingering not on Elena's face, but on her hat, her posture, the way she carried herself like someone who didn't flinch anymore. Elena didn't explain. She just unpacked her things, rolled up her sleeves, and started cleaning what was left. Weeks passed, then months. The Americans stayed, but in a different way now. Advisors, overseers, symbols of something new. People grumbled about occupation, about humiliation, about pride. Elena listened, but said little. When she spoke of Texas, it was carefully, and not often. When she baked, she added cornbread to the window tray. When she swept the street, she hummed songs no one else knew. One spring morning, she opened a small shop in what had once been the stable of a collapsed house. She painted the door blue. On the wall above the oven, she hung a photograph, a grainy black and white image of 6 women on horseback, all laughing, all covered in dust. None of them looked like prisoners. Children in the neighborhood came to watch her work. One boy asked about the hat she wore, still white, but stained now with time and flour. She told him it was a gift. "From who?" he asked. She smiled. "From a man who taught me how to trust a horse, and a country that taught me how to breathe again." She taught the local children how to ride using borrowed donkeys and patience. She never raised her voice. She never used a stick. When asked why, she answered simply, "Because fear doesn't make you stronger, just quieter." At night, she sat on the stoop and watched the stars. They weren't as wide as Texas, but they were still stars. Sometimes she wrote letters to the other women, scattered now across Italy. She didn't know if they would arrive. She wrote them anyway. Years passed. The town rebuilt, but never fully healed. People married. Graves were tended. Flags were changed. But Elena never forgot the days without fences, the evenings by the fire, the moment she first held a rope and was told, "Try it yourself." She never forgot the men who gave them coffee and taught them to ride, who looked at them not as captives, but as capable. One winter morning, an American tourist stepped into her bakery and blinked at the smell of biscuits and strong coffee. He asked, in broken Italian, if she'd ever been to America. Elena paused, wiped her hands on her apron, and replied, "Only once, but I never really left." The man looked confused. She didn't explain. Some stories aren't told. They're worn. In the way someone walks, in the way someone forgives, in the way someone remembers that kindness is not weakness. It's strength that doesn't need to shout. She had come to America a prisoner, but something else had returned, and that was enough.